So a brief before we start anything, all the slides that you're gonna see were made with visuals made by Sociocracy for All, which is an organization that I both work and volunteer in and have been doing so for a few years now. It is an international organization dedicated to spread sociocracy as a governance system. And YPC, that is where we are. And that's the idea, to learn more about sociocracy and YPC and to learn specifically about how it can be a good fit for YPC as a governance system or decision-making system. All of the slides, if you like them, you can feel free to copy them and use them for your own purposes, as long as you credit Sociocracy for All and you put the little logo on the left-hand corner, which is the license for it, Creative Commons license, which just basically says like, hey, this was made by SOFA, please don't sell it. Can we see the next slide, please? So before getting into the details and talking about what is sociocracy and what is governance and so on, I'd like us to take a step back and ask you, what are organizations? And more specifically, I'd like to ask you, how many organizations do you participate in? Julisa, can you click next? And don't answer the question yet, think about it and put it in the chat where everyone can see it, but don't click enter yet. Think about it. Close your eyes and count how many organizations you participate in. And if you have it, actually, no, I'm going to think of my answer. Once we all have it, I'm going to ask us all to click enter so that we see each other's numbers and see if we got different answers without being influenced by what the others thought. But let me think of my answer of how many organizations I participate in. Okay, I have my answer. Please enter your answer into the chat where everyone can see it, a number of how many organizations you participate in. And I'm seeing 4, 10, 8, 4, 7, 1, 6, 5. Capacity. Julisa, can you click next slide? Like the doesn't have to go to the whole next slide. It'll just give the next bullet point. Cool. And then now I'd like to ask you, like, what organizations did you think of? Anybody feel moved to go first? I'm actually going to go with whoever said the most. Who said? Well, I said 10. Ellie said 8. Do you want to share, Ellie? Which ones did you think of?
Should I list them out or?
Yeah, sure. Or what are they? Like their name, or what are they?
So there are a lot of like political ones, a lot of ones relating to my school. So like student government, different alliances at my school, different like racial justice ones. Let's see. Also part of this humanitarian advocacy organization. And so let's see. I do stuff with them, but then a lot of allied organizations. I don't know.
Cool. And then just to see what's on the other end, Carline, since you put 1, were you thinking of YPC or were you thinking of another one? And am I just assuming incorrectly? Just YPC, cool. Julisa, can you click next? And then one more next. And I'm going to ask, did anyone think of school? Did anyone consider school when they said what organizations they participate in? If so, please speak out loud. Nope. Would you consider it? Would you consider school on the list or not? Kind of, William. I'm seeing a hard no. You want to say more?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like especially for younger people, because school is mandatory for us, or at least supposed to be mandatory for us. But I feel like school is mandatory. We are technically supposed to go to school, and so it's not really a choice to be a part of that organization, just we have to be there.
Cool. So it is an organization, maybe it's just compulsory and like not ideal. Is kind of what I'm hearing you say. Far, I saw you signal with your hand, kind of. Yes, no, you're on the fence. You want to share anything?
I mean, I was thinking more of like the things like clubs, I guess I'm a part of in school and things I participate in. I feel like that in itself can be seen like an organization because that's like another commitment and another like time, like energy time that you're committing to, things like that. So, and I kind of consider that like as curricular, like YPC, all of that, like that falls in the same category. So I think so.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. By the way, I just realized I'm going a lot by what I see your reactions on your cam. So if you don't have your camera on, please feel free to share things on the chat and I'll try to follow it. I'll sometimes maybe forget it, but also if anyone else sees something in the chat that I'm not acknowledging and you want to, please unmute yourself and just say it freely. Then I'm going to ask another leading question. Also, hi, Samantha. If you want to say anything to check in and just say hi, please do.
Hi, sorry I'm late.
It's all good. The only thing that we've done so far is we checked in. We shared a little bit about who we are. And now we're just talking about what are organizations. And what you see on the slide is the only thing that we've talked about so far. Next slide, please, Julisa. I'm going to ask now, did anyone think of family when they thought of organizations? I'm seeing mostly no's. Deborah, I see you shaking your head. You wanna share?
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, I thought about it briefly, but I didn't put it because like my immediate family right now is one other person. But I kind of like the idea because it's people together making decisions together.
People making decisions together. It sounds like you're getting into the direction that we're gonna go. I'm gonna ask another one. Did anyone think of the government or anything similar like that? Whether it's, like hyperlocal, your borough, city, neighborhood, US government, New York State, any level of government. Did anyone think about it? Even if you didn't count it in, did you think like maybe that type of organization or institution would count in? Julisa, would you click next slide? No one? Anybody have thoughts they'd like to share about that? Oops. Anybody have thoughts they want to share about government, whether strong opinions on yes it is not? For example, William, when you spoke about school, you mentioned, man, not really excited about putting it on there since it's mandatory and you kind of have to be there. Oftentimes with government, that's even so much more the case, since one is just born somewhere. But basically, the main idea that I have with this reflection is thinking about two things. One is, what is an organization? Maybe it doesn't have a super clear definition. I like the one that Deborah was hinting at, of, like a group of people that makes
Eric,
decisions.
I don't know if you saw, but Samantha had her hand raised.
Yeah, I did not see it. I did not see the hand raised. Samantha, you want to share?
I don't think I can consider government as an organization, because when I think of organization, I think of something that anyone can join and anyone can kind of, work in toward a certain goal. But with government, especially like the United States government, I don't think that's something like regular people can do. So it's a little like, it's like borderline confusion where like, if you're in government and you are an elected official, then you can kind of consider it as an organization. But if you're like someone who isn't, then, where do you stand in this?
Right. I love it. So if we pretended to go with Deborah's definition of what an organization is, a group of people who make decisions together, then the government one is quite questionable, right? Because not everyone who is a decision maker, or especially like an involved decision maker, is an involved person, right? What I mean by government, when I say membership, is, for example, we have some sort of identification, like a passport in the case of the US, or like your IDs that say where you're a citizen from and where you live and everything. So in that way, government kind of compels people to be members of their organization, whether you kind of want to or not. But what is the point that I'm trying to make? Yes, one is that we can think of organizations basically as any group of people that meets to do something. And as Deborah was saying, most groups of people who meet to do things will have a decision-making system. And the other part is that a lot of times who we are is defined by the organizations that we participate in. If somebody asks you, who are you? Oftentimes the answer is whom you spent time with and the things that you are doing, the things that you're doing. And all the things that we do, like all human activities, are carried out by some type of group of people. No single human activity is carried out on its own. Can you go to the next slide, Julisa, please? Some questions too, so that it's not just me talking. And basically, why do you think we organize in groups? Why do you think we form organizations? What is their overall purpose? Like, why organizations? If you feel moved to answer, please do.
Ellie has her hand raised.
Please.
I think organizations exist to have a collective purpose to do something. So it could just be an alliance of people, of like Black Student Union is an organization that gathers Black students, and maybe it doesn't have a specific like policy goal, but has a goal of gathering people together and discussing things. Or I think we talked about before, like an organization could be family, and the goal of a family is probably to stay tight knit. I don't know if we'd consider that an organization. And I think just an organization in general is something that has a purpose of uniting people.
Thank you for sharing. I'm gonna actually invite everyone to put something in the chat. It can just be a word or a phrase or anything in response to the question of why you think we organize in groups and why we form organizations. And if you want to speak out loud and not just the chat, please do, by all means. Carline, do you want to?
Yeah, I think that we organize in groups because I think there's like a saying that like we're stronger together, or something of that sort. And like basically we can get more stuff when we like band together and try to get it done instead of like working individually. So yeah, I think that's why we organize.
Yes, that one very much resonates with me. Basically getting stuff done that we couldn't achieve on our own, right? And that's, I think, the main thing that characterizes humans as a species, is that we do things together. And if you think about it, like surviving as an individual, as a human, if we didn't have all the comfortable life that like life in togetherness provides, that life in community provides, would be quite rough. Like if you were just to go out like survivor mode into the wilderness, it'd be a rough time compared to, sharing a roof with other people. And putting a roof over one's head requires several people to like carry the stuff and build it together. And things like growing food and so on are just much more easily done by groups of people than by a single individual. And the issue that I think is that we're so good at cooperating, at putting a roof over our heads and getting computers that are made out of stuff that had to be mined from really far away, and getting food from really far away, and having an electricity system that plugs into the computer and so on. We're so good at it that it's invisibilized. Like you can't see all the human collaboration that is put in it. When I'm on my computer right now using it, it's really easy to not take into consideration how much work and how many different humans' lives had to touch, and how many organizations had to touch the bits that make up my computer, the tiny bits of plastic, the power that's currently running through it, etc. And so what I try to get at is like the collective nature of pretty much every single human endeavor. And we're so good at it that we've forgotten it. We are so good that we can get the idea that we're all alone, even though we're on our own in a small department that was made by other people, using the power and the food and stuff that was made by our fellow human beings. There's some stuff in the chat that I might be missing. More power in groups than working alone, in the same direction. To know your ideas are valid, yeah. So basically things in a way become more true, or they become more real when we hear them validated by others, right? It's not the same if I repeat something to myself than if I say it out loud and someone hears it and nods when I say it. Use each other's skills, sense of community and support, connection. I like working with people when I have choice. We organize out of love too, like when we're empathic with each other, our lives and our struggles. It's not something we deal with alone. Also, I'm partly reading them out loud so I can get a read of them, but if you want to read your own out loud or say more about them, please do. Also, hey, O'Brien and Neth, do you want to say hi? We're kind of getting started. Not really, we're kind of halfway through. But we're talking about the questions that you see on the slideshow, and some people are putting their answers in the chat. Do you want to say hi?
Yes, hi everyone. Are we introducing ourselves or just saying hi?
Oh, please go ahead and introduce yourself since we haven't met each other.
Oh, hi. My name is Annette. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm still thinking about the question, so I'll drop the responses on the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is O'Brien, pronouns he, him, his. And I'm also taking in and reflecting.
Thank you. So, Julisa, would you click next slide? And next slide. And next, a few next until that list is done. And basically I have my own answers to these questions for when we're not as chatty, in case the room is silent. I just say my own answers. But more important than what each one of them says individually, I divide it in two parts, which is what you see on the left side and the right side. And I think all of your answers kind of fit into those two categories. And on the left side is what I call meeting needs, or getting things done, achieving what the things that we can't do on our own, changing the world. Change happens through organizations. I'm talking about social change, but it can be any form of change we want to talk about. And the other one on the right side is the part about connection and belonging and community, and just the fact that it feels good to see people after a long day on your own in the computer or doing whatever. It just feels nice to see other human faces, and it's validating to like have eye-to-eye contact and to hear other people's voice and to feel listened. And I feel like that the idea of togetherness is like deeply ingrained into who we are as beings. And would you click next, Julisa, please? Basically, I think the synthesizing those two things together, that's how we usually find or create meaning in our lives. And it's basically, ooh, not yet. It's fine. Basically, it feels good to get stuff done, and especially if it's like with other people and it's for other people. And there's just something like really, really heavy on, accomplishing something. Are y'all familiar with Guante? He's a rapper and poet from the Twin Cities. Anyone here familiar with Guante? Nope. Guante has a line that is quite memorable that says something like, what you do is more important than what you say. What you build is more important than what you do. So what are you going to build today? And similar to that, when we build something, I think there's something really deeply meaningful and fulfilling in building something. Like imagine a building, imagine the very first humans that put together a building of whatever sort it was, whether it was a temple or a house, or they put rocks and materials together. And then they stopped and they looked at it together and they saw a piece of themselves, of who they are as a collective, that just sitting there on that thing that they built together. And they say, the people after us, in generations to come, they won't know our names and faces, but they'll see a piece of us by what we built together. And I think that gives meaning to our lives, basically, getting things done together and building things together. And that's what I mean by transcend, it stays beyond ourselves, and it stays beyond our individual selves, and it stays beyond our collective selves throughout time. Next slide, Julisa. Also, Carline, your hand is raised, but it has been raised since the last time you spoke. But if you want to say something more, please do. Oops, got it. Does anybody want to say anything else about the previous slide before I switch gears into something maybe less touching? Anyone, anything? Also, if you have questions, if I speak too fast, if the way that I speak is not so clear, please do. Actually, feel free to interrupt, not just the chat, but just straight up unmute and say, hey, you're going too fast, or I don't understand that word, or I don't know what you're talking about. Please do. All right. In that case, we talked about humans being inherently social beings and doing things together and working together as a way to get things done and to meet our most basic needs, like shelter, food, etc. And because of that, because everything we do through organizations, I think it's important to pay close attention to how we shape our organizations, because ultimately that shapes how our life is shaped, how our reality is shaped. Because if we're creating our reality through organizations, then the way that we organize our organizations, the way that we structure them, is foundationally going to structure the way that our reality is shaped. So I have a tiny example, a silly example. Julisa, would you give two clicks? And it's thinking of governance, which we can take a moment later if we want to talk about, what does governance actually mean? But whatever pops into your head with that word, it's fine. It's thinking about it in terms of social technology. So the technology part, imagine it with any technology, like a cell phone or a stapler, and it's that it has a why, a what, and a how. The why is its function or its purpose, which in the case of a stapler is to staple. What is what is how it's designed. So a stapler has the shape of a stapler, a shape that allows it to staple. It carries staples in it. It carries, the function that puts the stapler and keeps it put there. And the how is its behavior. In the case of a stapler, it is the staple. That is what the stapler does. Would you do 2 more clicks, Julisa, please? And I know it sounds like a silly example because we've all seen a stapler and probably used it. We probably don't use it as much now that everything's digital. But the same type of thinking can be applied to organizations. If we see organizations as a technology. Organizations as a technology because we realized, hey, we can actually grow more food or get things done quicker or meet more needs if we do it in groups. It's easier to carry things that are heavy. It's easier to carry it amongst 5 people than to carry it among one person. So if our organizations have the vision, the mission, the aims, the purpose, the why behind them is to change the world, to change how power works, to redistribute power, to include young people, to empower young people, etc., to democratize, then its structure, the way that it's designed, should be one that does that too, or that reflects that. In other words, a structure that also shares power, that also includes young people, that is also about democratizing, etc. And that way it could be part of what it does every day, its reality. So the idea is to align these three levels of being. the why, the what, and the how. Would you click on the next one, Julisa? And governance, I think, works primarily at the structural level. That's not to say only at the structural level, which is the shape of a stapler, not the fact that it staples, not the drawing of the stapler, but the shape that it has. And I think governance works primarily at the structural level. But a little bit more of what I mean by this, and more than what I mean, where I'm coming from. Oh, actually, can you go to the previous one? There's a couple of readings that I have there in the description of this slide, and I'm going to put them in the chat. Deborah says, never heard the term social technology. I think that's common, and it's debatable how much of a metaphor it is. And I've actually recently encountered some comrades who are more versed than I am on it, and like the definitions of a technology, and between the technology and a technique. So is like agriculture a technology? Is language a technology because it's something that's useful and that we develop together to facilitate other things that we do? Putting a couple of readings in the chat, and I can mention them briefly. But on the example of the why, what, how framework, for example, in the 20th century, in the last century, there were a bunch of really, really, really radical organizations that in their why, they were all about equity or egalitarianism, or whatever word or framework they used for it. I'm thinking of Marxist movements, I'm thinking of socialist movements, I'm thinking of unions, like work unions, like labor unions, thinking of the Black Panther Party, etc. They had very clear that, society amongst equals was the why behind their doing. But in the what, in the design of their structure, their organizations were very much designed the old-fashioned way, with hierarchies and with centralism. And so no matter how much work they did, and I hope I'm not saying that I'm not grateful for all the work they did, I very much admire them, but there was an inherent limitation in how their organization was designed, which was a top-down centralist one. And that also made it easily corruptible in time. And that's why a lot of them don't really exist anymore. That is one example of what I mean. The other example, the next one, is associating structure basically with things that we don't like. Associating structures in general with structures we don't like. For example, in the case of school or the government we mentioned, where it's like, I'm not eager to mention it as an organization because I didn't really sign up for it. Quite the contrary, they signed me up for it without my consent. And so oftentimes in social movement spaces, we tend to be allergic to structures. And we say, hey, we don't have hierarchies, we don't have any structures here. And basically, when we pretend to have no structures, we end up invisibilizing or not paying attention to the structures that we actually have. And we end up having invisible power dynamics that are just as unhealthy as other ones. In the classroom, it's very explicit that the teacher's in charge. But then oftentimes when we get together in a group and we don't establish, hey, who's in charge, or we don't have the clarity of saying, like, we're in charge together and this is how we operate, this is how that looks in practice, then we tend to what feels familiar to us. And what feels familiar to us is hierarchies. And that's why we end up doing the things that we don't like. The couple of readings that I have on that, one of them is called The Tyranny of Structurelessness. I always have trouble saying that word, but The Tyranny of No Structures by Jo Freeman. She writes about it in the context of the women's movement in the 70s. And then another one by a comrade of mine called Ted, and it's called The Myth of Natural Flow. And it speaks more about the sociocratic aspect. So one is a little more old-fashioned in what I mean about the 20th century and more from the social movement's perspective. The other one is from a more organizational side and speaking more to sociocracy. Next one. Next slide, please. Let's see. All right. So we can stop being so abstract about organizations and groups and 20th century revolutionary movements and think about sociocracy itself. Does anybody know off the top what sociocracy means, or not even what it means, but what you think it means? Also, note on pronunciation. Some people say sociocracy. That's okay. I don't know that there is a correct way. I say sociocracy. Does anybody want to answer what it means, either out loud or in the chat? There's no right or wrong answers. It can be whatever it means to you or what you've heard, what it reminds you of, what it sounds like. If it sounds similar to something in another language, that's also valid. I see community. Far, do you want to share more?
I mean, I'm just seeing how sociocracy is played out here, and I think one really big thing that we kind of like really liked about sociocracy was like the community and how it really united us together, and like it didn't create a divide, but really just created more relationships. So just not a network, but relationships.
Cool. Anyone else wanna share? I'll do another leading question. Can you put the next question, Julisa, please? Yeah, Carline, please go.
Yeah, I agree with what Far said, and I think that sociocracy is like kind of a way in which we govern, and it kind of steps away from the typical like hierarchy systems that we see in a lot of the organizations, and instead, at least in YPC and I'm sure in others, we kind of practice distributed leadership, and it's more so like a circle, so everyone works together instead of like it being like a pyramid kind of thing.
Cool. So in order for us to maybe dig our teeth deeper into the word, I thought of dividing it into the two like main halves of the word, so to speak. One of them is socius, the other one is crassi, or yeah, crassi. It's kind of awkward to pronounce it without the previous one, but okay. Does anybody know what either of those mean? Either socius or crassi? Yes, Ellie, please.
I'm not 100% sure, but I'd guess that like Crassi has to do something with government, because like it has in common like democracy, autocracy, that sort of thing. And I know socio is like similar to sociology, so I guess it like maybe has something to do with like society, but not sure.
That is all entirely certain. Crassi is exactly the same as in democracy. Socius is exactly the same as in sociology, society, etc. And what socius means is friend or peer in ancient Greek. And what krasi or kratia means comes from kratos in Greek, which some people roughly translate to governance or the exercise of power, or force or strength. The deeper you go into ancient languages, the less clear the translations get. But what I like about separating the two, the socios and the crassi, is that it shows, okay, if socius is peers and crassi means governance or decision making, then it's decision making by those who associate together. In other words, peer governance. One way that it gets stated, like the most basic definition of sociocracy, is those who associate together, those who work together, decide together, which is, I think, a good, concise definition. And it points to the fact that it's a system for self-management, right? What is annoying or problematic about the cases that we mentioned, like school and governance, is those who are the decision makers are not oftentimes those most affected or those most actively participating. the opposite of that in the case of self-management is those who work together decide together. Would you go to the next slide, please, Julisa? And what I like about also putting together the roots, the socios and the crassi, is that it makes evidence sort of like the two different organizational paradigms that sociocracy tries to synthesize, to balance. One is the traditional, the hierarchical one, the one that we're familiar with, the one that happens in most schools, the one that the government carries, etc., which is, you know, some people have more decision-making power than others, and some can decide over others. And that is set to save time in the short term, perhaps, yes. If you think about it, if you show up to school one day and the teacher says, okay, what do you want to do, class? Let's come to a decision together. Maybe it's actually pretty hard to come to a decision that meets the needs of all 30 people in the classroom together, let alone the whole school. So there's something practical in showing up to school every day and knowing you don't really have to decide what's going on. You know, like someone's going to decide for you. It's actually kind of comfortable to just sit back and like somebody already planned the agenda for the rest of the day. But we know that there's also a downside to that. Obviously, it hurts us to not have a say, especially in the things that deeply affect us. You know, in the case of school, it's like we're going to spend every single day of our lives for a solid 12 years doing that. Like it'd be nice to have at least some say. So it becomes painful rather quickly. And on the other side of the spectrum, we see the very egalitarian governance, egalitarian coming from meaning roughly the same as equal. And what's nice about egalitarian is everybody has a say. It's nice to have our voices heard. It's validating. But if every single day we try to come to a consensus among 30 people on every single one of all the decisions that we have to make, then that gets pretty unsustainable pretty quickly. So acknowledging both of these things, they're paradigms, they're ideas, they're patterns. They're not, you know, entirely one and the same thing. One is never entirely egalitarian. No organization is always 100% egalitarian, and no organization is also 100% hierarchical either. You know, in the classroom, I always talk about the classroom because school was such a hierarchical experience. But I could always chat with teachers. You know, there is a channel for communication. There is a part of our human recognition of each other. So they're abstractions, they're not to be taken seriously. But in the middle, in the intersection of the diagram, which by the way, if you can't see the diagram, it's two circles explaining the two main ideas I mentioned. In the middle is sociocracy, trying to say, okay, what are the best, what are the needs that each one of these systems or these paradigms are trying to meet? Which is to be inclusive and to more than save time. I know the diagram saves time, but more than saving time, is to get things done. You know, if an organization wants to build houses, then building houses is the criteria of how to be effective. More than how fast you actually build them. Would you go to the next slide, please? What I like about putting those two together, if we think back to the moment at the beginning when we asked ourselves why organizations, and I sort of divided the list into two categories, and one was the ones for connection, and the other one was the list for getting things done. I think each paradigm attends. Oh, I have to hop. These are some really interesting ideas. Okay, bye, O'Brien, if you have to leave. Oh, you already left. Where was I? What I like about that diagram, and what I like about splitting sociocracy into the two main bits of the word, or the words that compose it, is that one speaks to the part of getting things done and achieving things, and specifically meeting human needs, like our most basic ones, for shelter, food, etc. And the other one to the connection, the belonging, the community, the fact that it feels good to be around other people, what I call togetherness. And that if we see them as human needs, basically, if we acknowledge that, you know, doing things in groups is more effective, can yield better results in material things like growing food or getting water. And we acknowledge that connection and being heard and feeling togetherness is also part of our basic needs, just as basic as water, food, shelter, etc. Then they don't have to be pulling in different directions. The two energies don't have to be in conflict with each other. They can be one and the same. And I have somewhat of a visual metaphor, but basically, if the one for effectiveness and getting things done is represented by forward motion, like linear motion, and the other one of togetherness and connection is represented by the circle, sitting down with each other and speaking and seeing each other's faces as equals, then it never has to be solely forward motion or solely a circle, but it can be a spiral. And I call it the spiral of intentionality with shared power. And I just talked for a long time, so I'm curious to hear how any of this is sitting with you. Any type of reaction, question you want to share thus far.
Can you actually repeat what you just said about the circle and the spiral?
Yeah. If togetherness, what is currently in the slide that you just had, what is currently on the right side of the slide, which is equivalence, together, connection, etc. If it's represented by the circle, and if we see the other side that's on the left side, which is effectiveness, getting things done, meeting our material needs like food, water, shelter, etc. If we represent that with forward motion, like walking together, like linearly, it doesn't have to be either one or the other, or one is more important than the other, but together they can enforce each other. And the way that I visually represent that is the spiral of intentionality. And basically, when does it make most sense to get everyone's needs for this proposal to be a really good proposal? Or when do we just really need a proposal, and it doesn't really matter that it be all that good, or that it incorporate every single voice? I feel like I had another thought that was reminded by what you asked, Julisa. Spiral, getting things done. It'll come back. Anyone else? Questions, reactions about any of this? Doesn't have to be about this slide or what we just said, but the whole workshop so far. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Another way to phrase the same idea, which is the one behind, the main one that I think behind sociocracy the praxis, and sociocracy the word, divided as socio and cracy, and also that is captured in the phrase that you see there that says shared power, is we walk, but we walk together, and to be together, but to keep on walking. And that it doesn't have to be either or the other. That is, if we fine tune our senses to each other, then they can be one and the same. Last call for reactions. Ooh, I'm seeing the chat. I really like the spiral visual, Ellie said. Love that, Far said. Anyone else a chance to react before I talk a little bit more? Bear with me, it'll only be a few more minutes and then we can start landing it on YPC. Alrighty. So that's enough about sociocracy in the abstract, what it actually looks like. We have a saying here in Mexico. I don't know how well it translates, but basically when you tell someone about something and they've never heard of it before, like in the case of sociocracy, sounds weird, it's not really easy to pronounce, then they say, what do you eat that with? Or how do you eat that? So we can stop talking about the abstract concepts and think of how it's actually eaten. sociocracy. Would you give me the next slide, Julisa, please? How it looks in practice, if we just looked at the main design principles behind it, how it looks in practice is that it has three main tools, which is decision-making by consent in small circles. Can you go back one slide, please, Julisa? And then organizational structure with linked circles, circles being groups of people that are not that big, that are big enough to be able to speak by rounds and still be able to be slightly efficient with people speaking in rounds and doing by consent. And lastly, the one at the bottom, continuous evolution by feedback, which means evaluating and assessing constantly how much we're meeting our needs. And if you see at the top, it says steering towards the aim. Maybe that's not evident with a pie chart, but a governance, the word governance or the word government with its roots means something. I mean, it's ancient roots, like Greek roots, means something roughly equivalent to steering wheel and to steering. And so governance maybe sounds like a not so intuitive, or where if we were to say, what is governance, maybe we could get in the weeds. But a really short and simple answer means it's steering. If we're moving forward, how do we steer together? And at the bottom, you see it still says effective and egalitarian as the two main design principles that we talked about earlier. And I'm going to go into each one of those three different tools one by one, just mentioning them. Next slide, Julisa, please. The first one, rounds and consent. Basically, the main premise of sociocracy is keep decision-making groups small enough where everybody's voice can be heard. I think the limit of that is around 10 people, but of course, it doesn't have to be a rigid limit. It depends also on the facilitator. But speaking in rounds, making sure every voice is heard, making sure everybody has a turn, making sure everybody has head firsts before anyone gets seconds is another way of phrasing it. And it's evident how doing rounds and consent honors the part about egalitarianism and the part about connection and the part about feeling heard, the part of being part of the group. But it also, in a way, honors the part of effectiveness because it allows us to tap into what we call collective intelligence. If a group is small enough and participates through rounds and ensures equality through rounds or equivalence through rounds, then it gets to be psychologically safe. We earn each other's trust in the process. We build actually trust in the process. So you feel more at ease with saying, you know what, I'm actually concerned that if we carry out this proposal, we'll actually, step on our own toes. If you think about it, that's way harder to do and to feel comfortable with doing in a group of people whom you haven't met, and in a group where you didn't necessarily have a turn. It's very different to object if you have to raise your hand and interrupt someone in order to object than if you're asked. So in that way, in the part of having groups think as a unit and as a group, and also going with the idea of we can achieve more together than we can on our own, rounds and consent, while it seems like maybe it makes things slower, it also makes things more effective by making us smarter collectively and putting more information on the table for decisions. Next one, please, Julisa. The other part about circles is basically if we want to keep groups of people small enough that they can go on rounds and feel psychologically safe, then an organization of 100 people needs to have several different circles or cells, units of decision making. And the idea is that these different circles, if they want to work towards the same aim, they ought to be coordinated. And so we try to strike a balance in decentralized coordination between how much we delegate outside of the center, how much we decentralize decision making, and give a group the power of like, okay, hey, you're in charge of this part of the organization, you're in charge of running our social media. We trust you with running the social media of the whole organization, you subset of people, just 5 people. And with it, we give you the power to make decisions on what goes on social media. And they have full authority, they have the final say. But with that authority to make decisions on what goes on social media comes the shared responsibility to have the input of the whole organization on how the organization wants to be represented on social media. And so it's striking that balance between autonomy and interdependence. And that is usually done with the double link that you see there in the visual. It's a set of circles, and it has these dotted lines that are aimed at representing, dotted lines with arrows going through the circles that are aimed at representing how information flows. And basically that's how, a circle from the outer skirts, which has the most delegated responsibility of something as specific as social media posts, can get the information of, okay, what does the organization need from us? Because what they're doing it autonomously, and that they have the final say, and that they have the freedom to act, but they're doing it as a service of the whole or of the organization. So that's an aim to strike that balance. Oh, by the way, quick parentheses. The session we're having right now is aimed to be the first of a series of 4 workshops. And the 3 main tools that I'm mentioning right now aim to be the main topic of each session. So coming session, we'll be talking specifically about about circle structures. Next slide, Julisa. And lastly, the one about evaluation cycles, the one about steering, continuous feedback, is basically let's evaluate in short periods of feedback, which we in SOFA call lead, do, measure, where you make a plan, lead, you execute the plan, you do, and you measure. How much did this meet our expectations? How much did this meet the need that we were trying to meet? And basically the idea is when you're driving, when you're steering, you want to make minor adjustments here and there instead of radically change directions in 180-degree turns, often or not often at all. So if we're constantly making adjustments, we have better chances of failing fast and failing safe and failing often, so that we get better and we learn things from every time. Next one. Oops. Before answering those questions, I'm actually done talking. So if you have questions or reactions to the whole bit before we start sharing more of a dialogue on how to land it on YPC, please do.
Should I stop sharing my screen for this portion or later?
Good question. Why don't we put the questions that are in the next slide, which can I see them? As in there. Why don't we put those questions in the chat, which I can copy real quick. Ooh, I see some reactions in the chat. Carline says, I love how sociocracy really focuses on finding balance. Ellie says, me too. Julisa says, night. Yeah, why don't we stop screen sharing and we can take time to answer the questions in the chat. But do you have any other reactions or questions to all this bit that I shared? For example, was any of it completely new to you? Or does it all sound like, that sounds about sociocracy, like I've heard of that before? I'd be curious actually to get a sense.
what was spoken about felt familiar to me, but I think the concepts of like the spiral and what you just brought up, like those specific things, of like how two things can live together and kind of flow is helpful, and I'm making like connections to integrate and how they govern.
Awesome. I will say a disclaimer. Many of those things, like the spiral, they're my own twist on things, on sociocracy things. Like maybe if you go to the SOFA page, you won't see as much mention about the spiral, unless I made the blog post, then you will. But they're not as universal. Carline says, it all sounds familiar, but now I can better explain exactly what it was. Awesome, cool. So it sounds like it was clarifying of things that you were familiar with before. Far, I saw an emoji. Do you want to share?
No, I really like how you came up with your own concept that connected sociocracy. I think that's so interesting. If you ever do make a blog post about that, please send it our way. Would love to see that. And also just like really nice to see how like this is like really informative for me to know as a facilitator, when because there are times we're all gonna have to facilitate. Having these extra skill sets and having the background as to why like we do rounds is really important.
Cool. Yeah, same. I feel like when I facilitate, I oftentimes hinge on those two energies and to try to readjust and say like, am I leaning too much in one direction? Am I really trying to do things with balance? So I think also someone else in the chat said the idea of balance is, I think, pretty overarching throughout. Anyone else want to share? Yeah, Ellie, please.
So I facilitate some meetings outside of YPC, and people noticed that my facilitation had changed like since joining YPC. We're like, oh, like, wow, that's cool. Like, what about like consenting to this agenda item? Like, where did that come from? And I think it's like a testament to like how much that works, and like how someone was commenting like about how much more comfortable it made everyone feel that like everyone was on the same page the entire time. So I think it really shows that like YPC is like really dedicated to uplifting people's voices and making sure that like meetings are engaging for all members. And I think it really speaks to the vision about like uplifting youth voices in particular, and like because I think youth are especially sometimes excluded from things or not consulted, and it makes sure that and this sort of way of facilitating and just way of governance in general make sure that like that all participants are included and voices are heard.
Awesome. Yeah, I was thinking in facilitation, I think also the spiral becomes evident. If you think that the facilitator is trying to move the group forward like linearly throughout the agenda, like top to bottom in the agenda document, but to do so through rounds, so then you're just spiraling your way down the agenda. And then let's talk landing it on YPC. How does any or every of all of this, if any, relate to YPC, to its mission, its vision, its aims, its values, what its day-to-day activities? And for that one, I'm actually gonna ask for a round. Annette, do you want to go first?
Yeah, can you repeat the last question, please?
Yeah, how any of this, any bits we covered in the workshop or the presentation part, relate to YPC and YPC in general, like its mission, its aim, its day-to-day activities, what you do directly with it, etc.
Oh yes. I think what we learned, we were like it's helpful to have a structure for it, or like know like this is what it is, because I feel like a lot of what we went over, like at least like we were already doing, but I didn't necessarily know like, okay, it exists within this structure and it's like for these reasons. So I think the language was like really helpful. And I think it's like helpful to introduce it as that, maybe when we have like new members, like we're doing this like intentionally, I saw in like one of the slides, like it talked about like intentionality. So yeah, I feel like a lot of organizations maybe like don't take the time to do like, I have also brought these practices into like my meeting spaces and stuff like that. And before, like, I don't know, before we were like barely having check-ins. So I feel like this, like having like structures like this and like having rounds and stuff like that, like really helped to make sure that everybody was included in this space and like had like a voice.
Thank you. Samantha, you want to share how any of this relates to YPC for you?
Is it okay if we come back to me? I'm still kind of like thinking of what to say.
Of course. And if I forget, remind me to come back to you. Carline?
Yeah, I'm outside, by the way, so please excuse any background noise. But I think that, like, back to what I said in the chat about how before, like, it all sounds familiar, but now I can better explain it. So I think in terms of implementing all of this into YPC, like, we can really begin to, I guess, look at the practices better and really see if we're practicing it to the standards of sociocracy now that we know exactly what it is and how it really works. I think that can help in terms of like facilitating meetings or maybe like checking in with people over Slack, like any way that we kind of interact with each other in YPC, we can kind of look and reflect and think, is this following sociocracy and what it is?
I love that. I'm actually going to write that down for myself somewhere. Khadija, you want to share anything? Khadija, are you there, comrade? Oh, got it. I see on the chat. I agree. Like everyone's input. Cool. Far, do you want to share anything?
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting to see the ins and outs of rounds and just everything in general about sociocracy. And I think there's so much more that I had no idea about. And I feel like I feel like y'all hear my tired voice. Sorry, it's a long day. I put an all-nighter like I shouldn't have. Do not recommend doing that. But I really see like how this relates to the mission, vision, and aim is because since we're talking about balance, we can see how we're having intergenerational space. We create that balance of who's having power and who's like speaking. You know, like adults are not speaking too much because there's a balance, and sociocracy helps keep that balance. And I feel that's such an important factor in our space, and that's why we feel like our youth have so much. They feel like they have power, but they feel empowered as well. So I think that's just that's really cool. And I'll add more in the chat because I cannot remember everything that I came up with. But yeah.
Thank you. William, do you want to share anything?
Yeah, definitely. Like, first, I want to say this training, so much new information. Like, I had to take notes of some things because it's actually like some of it was really mind blowing. Because the thing that hit me the most was how sociocracy was the overlap between egalitarianism. I think that's how you pronounce the word, and hierarchy. Because, well, I also don't know what egalitarianism means, but I think it's so interesting because I always just thought hierarchy was a really bad thing, but to see sociocracy being a combination of both egalitarianism and hierarchy, it's like, oh wow, I did not know that. And then just adding on to things that people said before, like norms and rounds and consent, and actually bringing these things to different spaces is so beneficial.
A quick clarification, William, since you asked, egalitarianism comes from the French word égalité, which literally translates to equality. But then in English, there's just no equalitarianism, so that's why they call it egalitarianism. But then, of course, there's the problematizing on like, oh, equality has been used in so many different ways. And so we come up with alternatives like equity and equivalence, and what the difference between all of those are depends on the context. But they all roughly mean the same. What I mean is, in this specific case, they aim to meet the same need, which is that everybody feels heard, or that no one feels ignored, which maybe is just as important. Ellie, do you want to share anything?
I think I mostly shared a little bit about this question before, so I think I'm gonna pass, if that's okay.
Cool. Yeah, that's why I did that phase right after I said, like, did Ellie already go this time? My bad. Deborah?
I'm just thrilled by hearing about how these practices have spread to other organizations beyond taking it. Me too. Like, there's this other organization where I just implemented sociocracy on the slide. And I think it's just so associated with how we are about the 7 C's of collective impact. I see how sociocracy is about co-creation, it's about being community-led. And I'm imagining this future where, you know, YPC is 10,000 members and everyone knows about sociocracy. And so now there's this ripple effect, and maybe eventually our schools will all be sociocratic. Like, I think it'll just feel so great, and it might be one of the best things we do.
Julisa?
Yes. We're answering the questions, right? Or are we still doing the like, yeah.
We're entering the questions that I put in the chat, which is, how does any of this relate to YPC? And that's the rest of the agenda today. So please don't, if you're saying something like you're saving something for later, don't. Now is the time.
Okay, got you. What was on my mind is that just similar to everyone, like having a clear understanding for everything that like made sense already, but like is just now making the most sense. Like the going in rounds creates trust, like that, like obviously, you know, but yeah, and yeah, it's a lot of synchronicity with like just like Deborah pointed out, with like how other orgs are working and like what you think should be implemented and like what the training had. So definitely processing it all. And yeah, I don't know, this what is power question, you gotta get back to me on it.
Yeah, that's definitely has a number of blog posts sitting on it. Samantha, back to you. You wanna?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I kind of just want to say that I agree with everything that everyone has said, but I also want to say that I feel like both questions have like a connected answer, because with our mission, our vision, and our aims, we all want some form of, you know, collective impact and collaboration, and just like a way where we all, I don't know if govern's the right word, but like where we all work together toward like, you know, one goal, multiple goals. And I think that this is reflected in our meetings as well, with, you know, like everyone said, like with the rounds and everything, but the way that like we split up work, but in our circle, we're all dependent on each other, just the way that our organization is dependent on each circle. And I feel that this distribution of power, like it's not where like each member has like a job that's more important than, you know, someone else's, and like no circle I feel is more important or less than another. And I think that just allows us to work in a place where not only we're like we feel like we have power, but like we actually have that power. Like it's concrete. It's not something that's like an idea or like that we have to sit and like hope around for, because like for us this is a reality. It's like with Deborah saying that like we want, like if she wants to see something with like 10,000 members, I mean, like it's definitely something we can do, because we're already doing that, just like on an incredibly smaller scale.
Thank you so much. Why don't we just do another round? And if you want to take it in the direction of the second question of how do governance and sociocracy relate to power and intersectionality, I also put what is power there in parentheses. I don't hope for us to come to a consensus on it, but if that's in any way helpful to stimulate the reflection, or if you're just having any free reaction to what others are saying, etc., like free round, take it anywhere you want to. Annette, you want to go? And please tell me if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Yeah, you're pronouncing it right. It's Annette. Can we come back to me?
Of course. Carline?
I think it's kind of a loaded question in a way, trying to think about how governance and sociocracy relate.
I can't really hear you, Carline.
Oh. Sorry, can you hear me now?
That's much better.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that is kind of a loaded question to think about how governance and sociocracy relates to intersectionality and power. So I need a little bit more time to think about that.
Khadija, you there? You want to share? Anything and everything? I really like how it was presented. Way more digestible to me now. I'm aligned. Awesome. Thank you. Happy to hear that. Far?
This is like a really big question that I'm also like, oh, I don't even know how I should answer this, because they're all definitely connected. Without a doubt, they're connected. I'm just trying to figure out what's that point that connects all of them. And I think it just goes with power and balance. I feel like those are the main points of how they're all connected. And also I think identity plays in a role with this. But yeah, I don't know exactly what is that specific point.
William?
Kind of just like similar to what everyone else said. It's very, like, it's such a broad question because literally everything is intersectional. So I really don't know. I'll pass.
Ellie?
Yeah, I definitely feel what William said about basically everything being intersectional. And yeah, I think I'll pass for now.
Deborah and Julisa?
I thought about power as the ability to change reality for yourself and others. And so decision making is part of that, right? Who decides what that reality will be, and how do we get there? From an intersectionality perspective, I think one thing we didn't talk about in this, I'm very curious about, are things like how can sociocracy and equity come together? Because let's go back to schools. If the people who decide the curriculum are in a curriculum circle, but they're all the teachers, like that's not really equity and hearing everyone's voices, because students should be on that. Administrators should be on that. Maybe members of the community. So with intersectionality, I think a lot about like whose voices are heard within the structure of a sociocratic organization.
Julissa and then Ellie.
Thank you. So looking at the second question, I feel like there's a lot going on. I feel like governance and sociocracy, like governance only, like it can only stand as and if you're thinking of governance as sociocracy. If that makes sense. Because governance is like just the way that like America, for example, does it. Like it's not that. And so how that relates to power and intersectionality is very interesting. I think it's like, it's obviously like delegating the power, but I think, yeah, like then you have to define what power is. And I really, really like Deborah's definition, because just thinking of like reality as something that you can change is so empowering too, because it's very true. And intersectionality. Yeah, I don't know how power and intersectionality relate other than like those experiences being power, like themselves, like that makes sense. So yeah, I just talked through my digestion of the question. I'm still going through it. So Ellie, you can go.
Nice. Ellie, then Carline, because I'm seeing hands raised, but then I also want to get back to Annette, since Annette said get back to me later.
Something that Deborah said reminded me of this like democracy now graphic that defines power, and it says, and it like lists, it's like an acrostic poem. So the first one is perspective, whose voice, and it's sort of media focused, but I think it's still applicable. And it's perspective, whose voice drives the story, ownership, whose interests are being served, worldview, what cultural narratives or stereotypes are being advanced, effects, what impact does the story have on me, and representation is the diversity among the kinds of people being shown. So I just thought, like, I don't know, and that like is an acrostic poem for power. And I just thought that was relevant. I can like take a picture. I don't have it online.
Cool, thank you. Sounds awesome. Carline?
Yeah, I agree with what everyone said so far. And something that Far said in terms of like sociocracy, power and balance really made me think about how like power isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think that sometimes people can get the idea that power is bad when it's not. It's only bad when there's no balance to it. And I think that sociocracy helps keep that balance. So everyone has power, but it's a shared power. Nobody has more power than anyone else, which helps keep a healthy balance. And it's a good blend between, what was it? Egalitarianism and hierarchies. So I think having that balance in relation to sociocracy helps keep a nice, I guess, I'm saying this word too much, but balance of power.
Awesome, thank you. Annette, you want us to go back to you?
Yeah, I really appreciate everyone's input because I feel like it really is like a big question, like what is power, you know? And the thing you said, Deborah, about shifting reality, like really hit. So thank you for that. I think, oh, sorry, give me a second. Sorry. So I think power is just like a really big like concept, and people can sort of like take it and like structure it or construe it however they want, right? So to be thinking about like sociocracy as a way of like governance, and like within that like intersectionality, to be thinking about like everyone's identity and like all the identities that one may hold, like I don't know, like people, it's just really great to see that you know that there's a way to do that, because the way that the structures that we exist under right now is like definitely not made to so that people believe or like feel like they can exist with all their identities in a space.
Thank you. I'm going to give myself a turn in the round. Try to answer the question. I also love Deborah's definition of power. I actually read it this morning, and I feel like I was writing on it all day because I've tried to do an attempt of writing actually a blog post on this, and it's been on the back of my mind all day. So this feels like full circle. I also like defining it as the ability to do. Probably influenced by the fact that in Spanish, poder is like the same as podemos, like yeah, we can. So, and you've probably heard it in a chant here and there, or like the name of the political party in Spain, Podemos, etc. Then what else? How any of this relates to YPC's mission, vision, and aims. I think that the very basic why, what, how thing of if YPC, you know, dreams of a world where New York youth are equipped with the skills to thrive and be happy, etc., then the first place to start is to do it with New York youth, you know, and like it's as simple as that, but that's the radical part of it, of like, oh, we want to live a city where New York City young people work together with adults and they share power together. Then okay, then let's sit at a table together and share a room together and share power together and speak in rounds and actually do it. And I guess the other phrase that comes to mind when thinking of that and when thinking of the spiral is that, you know, process is product, or that the road is made by walking, or that we make the road as we go. And I think that's not dissimilar from the part I was mentioning of the spiral and the two energies of it's effectiveness and inclusion or voices heard. And effectiveness doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, make the most money in the less time. Effectiveness is in terms of the needs we want to meet and the impact we want to have. So in a needs-based organization, hearing people's voices and taking the time to hear everyone's voice is the most effective, you know. Like effectiveness doesn't just have to be in terms of product, but it can be in terms of, you know, how much do we care for each other, you know. In Spanish, it also works nicely because we say it's as effective as it is affective or affectionate, meaning kind and loving. And I think that speaks to like, yeah, something very, very primal in our being of like, it just feels nice to be heard. It just feels nice to spend time with people. And that actually enables us to do things, to feel loved, to feel cared for, and to actually care for each other. I'm gonna kind of switch gears to a different question. We have 15 minutes left. And basically, before we check out, I'm curious to hear what of all this you're interested in exploring deeper. Also, sort of to get feedback on the future of the workshop. This is the first session out of 4, and I'm still, I have a broad idea of where I want to take the next 3 sessions, but not totally detailed, definitely not set in stone. And so I care about having your input and your feedback of what of all this sounds interesting, or what didn't get mentioned that you'd like to see mentioned. What are you wanting to explore more? I'm going to go reverse order and say Ellie, then Deborah.
I really enjoyed this, and I feel like I learned a lot about a concept that I really didn't know about at all before. And so I really appreciate that. I think this isn't a content thing, but I've just been on Zoom for a really long time all day. And so, and I really enjoy sharing space with you all. but I think if the session was a little bit shorter, it would just be a little bit easier for my screen time. And so I really enjoyed it. And that's not to say anything about the content or anything. That's just me being on my computer all day. That's my one piece of feedback.
Thank you. Deborah?
I can go, but I'm also wondering, Far, since you said that you might be heading off earlier, do you want to interrupt the round and then I'll go after you?
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Samantha and Ellie. So I think one feedback I have is like having just like resources to like take away with us, like any articles, websites, whatever it is. I think those are always really helpful, and like even videos. Like, you know, we all have like different ways that we learn best. So yeah, just having those like resources to always look at and just take away with us. And I will be heading off. Thank you, y'all.
If you want resources, check out the links that I put in the chat, and I can put them again in the chat on the couple of readings. And yes, I can diversify media used in the next one. Here's one link. Bloop. And that other link. That other link. Thank you for noticing that and interrupting the round, Deborah. Do you want to go?
Yes. I'm very curious about the evolution through feedback part. I think that part is the least institutionalized part of sociocracy within Youth Power Coalition. Loved how much we were able to learn from one another, because yeah, you're just like, this conversation about power was very surprising to me, and I saved some quotes of what people said, like especially Carline, what you had said around starting with, I think sometimes people can get the idea that power is bad when it's not, and it's only bad when there's no balance to it. It was so lovely. So that I appreciated. I also think shorter would have been better. And the part that I got the most lost at was definitely the social technology piece. That's super helpful.
Awesome. William, anything that you'd like to explore more?
I feel like everyone said it already, but I don't know. I just really like this training, but in terms of exploring more, everything, because literally everything intrigued me, especially the balance between egalitarianism and hierarchy, and just overall, I think just everything, honestly. Is that a bad answer? I'm gonna say that.
No such thing as a bad answer. Khadija, anything you want to explore further?
No, I think I'm all good. Thank you.
Carline, or did you already go? I don't think you've gone this time, have you?
Nope. I would like to explore more how we can track our sociocracy practices to make sure that we're practicing it in our circles. And then also maybe, I don't know if this, I guess it's kind of relates to like governance, but maybe transition of powers, which we've kind of been practicing, but to learn a little bit more about that. And then handling like conflicts, if there's like a certain practice in sociocracy on how to go about that, or just holding each other accountable. But yeah, other than that, I think this was a great session. Thank you, Ellie. I think this was a great session. And yeah, I agree. I think it could be like a little bit shorter, maybe like an hour, 30 minutes. But other than that, thank you so much.
Awesome. Samantha, anything you're eager to explore?
I don't know if this counts as exploration, but I'm really excited to read the readings that you sent, the myth of natural flow and the one on tyranny. And hopefully I'll be able to find other readings that are kind of related to it.
Cool. if you get real interested by them. The tyranny one is on the SOFA blog, and the SOFA blog has quite a diverse selection of content. It's all related to sociocracy, but like some of it is really focused on like how-tos and super just like by the book how-tos on, you know, tips for facilitation and stuff like that. And then some others get more abstract and do ask things like, what is power, and things like that. And so anything in between that range you'll find there. And if you end up liking Joe Freeman's reading, I have the feeling that it's probably from a book. Like, as in the bit that I shared is probably a selection from something bigger. If you're into that, I actually haven't gotten deeper into her stuff. Aneth, anything else you want to explore?
Yeah, it's a net, like the H is silent.
And
it's okay. I think all the information was definitely helpful. For feedback, I think maybe if we did like rounds while like the information was shared out, like between the tools. That's just for me though, because like I tend to like just forget like the information that was shared first and kind of just remember like the last pieces.
Thank you so much. Julisa?
Thank you. I definitely agree with Annette. I didn't know it until she just named it, but I also take a long time to process things. So conversation and hearing others' perspectives of like the info we just talked about would be helpful. And yeah, just sharing with each other like what comes up. Like you shared like the spiral theory that like you came up with, like inviting everyone in the space to kind of do that. Yeah.
Cool. Did I miss someone? Anyone else? Feedback before we check out on this. Alrighty, then let's check out. How are you leaving this session? Annette?
I'm leaving very informed and excited to see how we implement these tools in our meetings.
Samantha?
I'm leaving curious. I really want to learn more and do my own research. So thank you.
Awesome. Carline?
I'm leaving feeling clarified. I don't know if that makes sense.
Khadija?
Yeah, everything that was said is based. I want to see where things go. And I'm all good here, aligned.
Cool. William?
I'm leaving feeling intrigued and wanting to learn more.
I'll give myself a turn to check out. I'm feeling really happy, actually really energized. This is the usual time, like afternoon, when I can dedicate time to YPC and when other circle members can meet. And I usually don't do computer stuff in the afternoon because I just feel so sleepy after eating, and also like my mind feels dispersed. So I do other things like read or exercise and so on. But this time it wasn't the case because I was totally nervous, and so I could not feel sleepy. And now very, very energized, and I'm very happy, and I love the way it went. And this happens to me oftentimes in workshops where I get really nervous and like, oh my God, sharing space with people and like having my voice be heard and talking and then hearing others speak and keeping track of time. And it sounds awful. And then I actually do it, and it's not just not bad. It's great. It's really fun. It's awesome to spend time with you, and I love it. Thank you so much. Julisa and Deborah?
Thank you. I'm leaving the space open. I think I'm really taking what like you shared multiple times of like two extremes that like are presented to us as extremes, but really like just represents the flow of life, like how you have to really like be open to both. So I appreciate that. And I wanted to appreciate you for hosting our first training, Eric. It went really well. I think I enjoyed how like it was short. It was 2 hours, but like the slides themselves weren't packed with content. And we had like 30 minutes at the end to, you know, have a nice discussion. Thanks.
Can I share something quick before you go, Deborah? The slides, by the way, since I shared with you, if you wanna like use them for anything, please go ahead and make a copy and distribute freely and make it your own and change it and so on. Just make sure you include that. They all have the SOFA logo at the bottom and the license, and as long as that stays intact, go ahead and use it. Deborah?
I'm super excited, learned a lot. I am so impressed with your timing skills, Eric. Like, it was amazing. Could you, I have a request, which is, could you send out, could you send out more information about Sociocracy for All as a resource? And then I encourage everyone who's like, I'm really curious, I want to learn more, to go ahead and do that, because Eric is one of many community members who are all making Sociocracy accessible. And I'm thinking like there are definitely some, you can join the Facebook group, you can read the things, but also meet other SOFA members, because it's a really cool community, and there are a lot of training opportunities. And I'm thinking with YPC, if we want to do external training to get to like a whole other level of governance, I will say that we could pay for it. I think Julisa will have to talk about this, and Carline in the business circle, but like that would be ideal.
Awesome, thank you. Yes, I'm all for redirecting folks to SOFA. Also, as Deborah said, I'm not just one more community member, but anything and everything I know about Sociocracy, I learned from SOFA. And that's why also I think like putting the logo and the license is so important, because, you know, they've given me all this knowledge pretty much for free. Like they've given me so many like opportunities to learn and practice much more. And so if any of this was clarifying or useful or clear, it's because they've allowed me to try it and fail at it a number of times before I did it here in front of you today. And I put the website, SOFA's website, in the chat, but sociocracyforall.org, it should come up easily. And that's it. Does everybody want to unmute and say bye?
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Well, I also wanted to say
Bye.
thank you so much, Julisa, for making this possible on the logistics side. Pretty much like every single thing that is like a bare minimum requirement to host an online training, you did, and I felt so kindly supported at every moment of the path with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Bye.
Bye,
Bye, guys.
Peace out.